Hi, Homeworthy. I'm Helen. Welcome to my studio in Queens. Come on in.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
My name is Helen Levi. I'm a production potter, and we're at my studio in Ridgewood, Queens. So I've been making ceramics as a hobby since I was a kid. It's been my job for, this is the 12th year, and I've been in this studio since 2019. But the studio started much smaller. I just had a shelf in a communal pottery studio, and then slowly, incrementally worked my way up to now having this space, which is a little over 1,000 square feet. Today, I'm gonna give you a tour of the production studio, and I'm also gonna show you how I make one of my best-selling pieces, which is the beach mug, start to finish, which you can find on my site or in person every Saturday at the studio shop. So this space was just an apartment. The ceiling was dropped 2.5 feet, so now there's 12-foot ceilings, but that was something we didn't know until we started demoing. And we basically just wanted to make it a big open space. The floors are just 4x8s of plywood to make it really like a functional work floor. But I really just wanted as much open space as I could, and then kind of created the little sections with furniture. So over here, this is where I can do finishing work, like I could attach handles or do any kind of like hand building here, but I also use it a lot for photography. It has nice light from the window, and so I do all my own photography here. This is my wheel. I mostly do very small batch stuff on the wheel now. In the beginning of my business, the wheel was my only method of production, but I realized pretty quickly that that was gonna limit how many pieces I could make. Now I use the wheel to make prototypes, to make originals for molds, and to just do small batch. Over here is my table that I use when I'm using the wheel, which is why it's messier. This is where I cut my clay, prep my clay, put things that are in progress while I'm throwing. And then I have this rack for pieces in progress on the wheel. So this is the slab roller, which rolls out clay into big flat pieces, which I use for hand building. I also use it in mold making sometimes, but I do make some serving platters and serving bowls out of slabs. These are my biggest molds. These make some very large planters, kind of for, I call it a tree planter, for your kind of indoor trees. So these are super big molds that live on these carts because they're so heavy. Plaster is extremely heavy. Then moving over here, this is a metal table that we use for kind of wet work, which is cleaning the greenware, making plaster molds. This is kind of the messy area. We also have all the greenware racks. So greenware means clay that hasn't been fired at all. Clay, in my studio, we fire everything 2 times. The first time is the bisque firing. That's so that you can glaze it. And then the second time is the glaze firing, which makes it the piece complete. So greenware is pieces that have not been fired at all. And greenware is the most fragile state. You could just crumble it in your hands pretty easily. Here, I'll show you. This is a piece of greenware. You can just break it right in your hands. So before a piece has been fired, it's extremely fragile. And clay can be recycled as well when it's not been fired. So with greenware, you can recycle it, and you add water and reconstitute it. And it's actually a lot of work to recycle clay, but before a piece has been fired, it's infinitely recyclable. All of this greenware is from the casting section. So these are all pieces that we made with colored slip. It looks very muted at this stage, but after firing, it's a lot more saturated and brighter. But you can still see the pattern here in the clay. So this is the step where we add it. And I would say that marbling and this type of colored clay work is pretty much what I'm known for. I really love making pattern this way as opposed to at the glazing step, although I have been experimenting with that a little more recently. This table I got on Craigslist, and it's a potter's wheel table, which means that under this tabletop there's 3 wheels embedded in it. So this was like such an early piece of pottery equipment in like early production, that there would be like 3 potters sitting at a table doing production pottery. So I don't use it as a mechanized table because it doesn't make sense for me, but I just love the kind of history of this piece. And I just found this metal top that fit right on top so that we could use it as a surface. This sink is very special to me. It's my big slop sink. And it was made by Charles Graham Pottery. It has the stamp down here, which was like a 1800s pottery production in Brooklyn. And so this is a ceramic sink. And I just love feeling like I'm, in my own tiny way, continuing the American production pottery history in this studio. And I love having a piece of that here. I got this at Big Reuse in Brooklyn, which has salvage, architectural salvage stuff. And then these were prototype tiles that I made before I eventually collaborated with a factory in Mexico called Ceramica Swirl. And we made a line of tiles together that they produced, but I designed. So these were the original tiles I made here just to kind of workshop the idea. So it was nice to include these. And then an old studio mate of mine who is a woodworker and a metal worker and a welder welded me this base for this sink because it's so heavy. So shout out Evan for the metal welding work. I have been working with clay since I was a kid as a hobby. My parents sent me to an after-school program at a local community center in Manhattan. I grew up in Manhattan, and I took pottery classes as a kid, and I always loved it. And as I got a little older, I was working as a student teacher to my beloved pottery teacher, and then after college, she went on maternity leave, and I covered all her classes. And it was at that point that I was, for the first time, doing clay full-time, you know, for a short period. But I really loved just being in the studio every day and managing the studio. And that was the first time I really could see myself doing it every day. And at the time, the only way that I knew of that you could make a career in ceramics was being a teacher or being a fine artist, like a sculptor. But neither of those paths really felt right to me. And then it was right around that time that there was kind of this huge influx in the interest in handmade pottery. I met Stephen Allen from the clothing brand at an event, and he was about to open his home goods store, and he was looking for handmade goods for the home. And through meeting him, I got the chance to make my first order for that store. And it really just kind of opened up my eyes to this whole world of, you know, handmade products that people were making and highlighting. And from that first order, I was like, this is what I want to do. And so that was 12 years ago. I have 2 casting tables because I cast with 2 different stoneware slips. One is white and one is like a speckled tan. I also mix it up sometimes when I want to use other colors, but it's nice to have the option. All of these are different plaster molds that I use. One of my favorite things about the scale of my production is that I have the freedom to change my mind all the time, which really works for me creatively. So when I get a new idea, I can just make a new mold and try it out. If I get sick of something because I feel like I've been making it too much, I can just pause it. These are some new, this is a new mold that I'm trying out that's kind of a version of this appetizer bowl, which I made for, you know, olives and nuts and snacks. And this one is, now I'm kind of thinking could be a nice little jewelry tray or something like that. So it's really important for my creative process that I can just try something out, and it just keeps it fresh for me and keeps it from feeling stale. So these tables I had custom made after seeing a video on YouTube about it. And underneath the table, there's bins of slip. So slip is the liquid clay that we use in slip casting. We pour the molds full with the slip and then dump the excess back into the bin to reuse it. So it's really handy to just pour it right from the table down into the bin. In terms of the shapes and the molds that I use, I'm really thinking function first. I really want to make everyday dishes that feel usable and you want to reach for in your cabinet. So that's kind of my guiding principle when I'm coming up with all the shapes. And then I can express the color and pattern while still having like a very functional shape. So that's kind of where it starts for me. This is the kiln and the glaze section of the studio. I have 3 electric kilns, kind of a small, medium, and large. This is all the furniture for the kilns. That's what all these shelves and posts are called. This is so that you can put things in the kiln of different heights and sizes. Loading the kiln is one of my favorite parts. It's after all these years, I'm the only one still who does it. I don't have assistants do it because I feel like it's the same like gene that makes you good at packing the trunk of a car or packing a suitcase. I find it very satisfying. So you can look in this open kiln here and just see how with the bisque, you can stack things on top of each other, but in the glaze, they can't be touching because they'll get fused to each other. So it's always kind of a puzzle depending on what you're making to load the kilns. I fire a mid-range stoneware, that's what it's called. It fires to about 2200 degrees. And so it has coils inside that carry electricity and heat it up. It's very well insulated with this kiln brick. So it really contains the heat inside, but it's just kind of like an oven. There are a lot of different ways to fire clay. I use these electric kilns because here in New York City, that's kind of the most straightforward way. There's gas kilns, wood fire kilns, all kinds of different firing methods, but for where I'm located, this is kind of the main option. I wanted to show you, so this is the first casting from that little mini appetizer bowl mold that I'm trying out. So this is just the first test. So I'm kind of imagining, so this is bisqued, which means now it's not gonna break in my hand. I can glaze it safely, but it's not finished yet. So I'll choose the color and glaze it how I like, and then maybe it can be like a ring and necklace dish or something like that. It's funny because a lot of adults try pottery just as a hobby, something kind of relaxing to do. And I've actually never met an adult who's tried it and didn't like it. Everyone who's ever been like, oh, I'm taking a pottery class, or, oh, I decided to try out a workshop, they've all loved it. So I think that clay is just, it's so incredibly satisfying to start with a literal lump of clay and then end up with something you can use in your kitchen. I've never met somebody who didn't like that feeling. And it's really like, I don't think there's really mistakes you can make. I have a potter friend who told me early on there's no such thing as a pottery emergency. And I feel like that's true. I mean, it's just clay. It's supposed to be kind of slow and peaceful. And if you can just let yourself be in that mindset, it's not really possible to make a mistake. This is the glazing table, which is really handy to have right across from the kiln, since everything comes out of the kiln as bisque and then goes right back into the kiln to glaze fire. And this is an example of the beach mug bisqued. So you can see the colors are starting to become a little more apparent, but they're still pretty pastel, and they'll get much more bright in the final firing. But under this table, I have all my glaze buckets, and here I have some more squeeze bottles of glaze, because the same way that I do the tinted clay for slip casting, I also tint glaze and use a plain base glaze like white or clear and tint it with different stains. And then I can do more marbling and swirling of glazes, kind of a similar technique, but with glaze versus clay. And this is where I glaze everything. It's always a bit of a mess. I can never have this table clear because it's such a working surface. And I'll show you how I do some glazing as well. Glaze is what makes a piece food safe. And you don't have to have glaze on, for example, a planter. But if I want this mug to be watertight, I glaze the inside. I like to leave the outside unglazed, but I'll put glaze on the inside so that once it's fired for the second time at a higher temperature, it'll be totally food safe. And I do also like to glaze the handle because it just makes it a bit smoother to the touch. There's a different texture of the unglazed clay versus the glazed clay. But glaze is also obviously a big opportunity to add color, pattern, and a lot of decoration to the piece. So it's for function, but it's also for decoration. The front of the studio is where we ship everything, and also it's where we have a little shop every Saturday. So this space started as only for shipping, and we had all the shelves for all the finished pieces, and I thought, oh, this looks so nice on display. Like, wouldn't it be nice if people could come in and, you know, peruse in person? So I used to do kind of like a few times a year, we'd have a big studio sale where we'd open up the whole studio. And then it just started to feel too hectic doing that. And so now we do this every Saturday. It's very chill. It's very relaxed. You can come in, shop, and it kind of took away that hectic feeling, which I was ready for. And this is where we display all the finished pieces. And then there's inevitably, with any production pottery, there's seconds. Seconds means imperfect. It's usually, for me, it means still totally functional, but slightly imperfect, and it's not up to the quality of a first. So all of this inventory is the web shop, and these are firsts. So these are pieces with no blemishes. And then everything else is seconds or samples, because I also do a ton of testing before I finalize a design. So I may test something out and then it comes out of the kiln and I'm like, oh, that didn't really come out how I wanted or how I expected, or I'm still workshopping it. So everything over here is seconds or samples or one-offs or tests. So I make a lot of those pieces, and those don't really go on the website because they're one-offs and it's kind of too much work to put them online. So that's also why I like having the in-person hours, because you can just see some of the process. So this is the beach mug finished. So this is the final colors. You can see how the handle is shiny because we dipped it in glaze. The inside is shiny because we poured glaze. This means that it's food safe, it's ready to use. The outside is unglazed, so it has just the kind of raw feeling of the clay. And all these swirls are from marbling that liquid clay inside the mold. So you can see that every single one is gonna have a unique pattern. It's like a wave in an ocean. I mean, they feel the same, but they don't, when you really look at the fine details, the shapes are gonna be totally unique, which is what I really love about this series. I make other pieces in the beach pattern as well, but the mug is for sure the bestseller. My second best-selling piece is this artist series, which is actually the oldest style that I've been continually making. I've been making it for more than 10 years, and it's made exactly how you would think, which is splattering with a paintbrush. It has 6 colors, so it's actually extremely tedious to make, very time-consuming to do the 6 colors, but yeah, this is one of those series that is still selling well after all these years, so I'm still making it, even though it's kind of like a simple design. During the course of production, many things can go wrong and do go wrong, and that's a normal part of the pottery making process. And what goes wrong totally varies from piece to piece. But for example, it's really hard to see, but this mug here has a teeny tiny crack right here on the inside of the handle, which can just happen while it's drying. It happens from time to time. It's totally covered with glaze, so it's still, in my mind, food safe and fine to use. But I'll sell this at a discount in person instead of selling it online. And every single one of these has its own little defect. I only sell things that are still functional. And everything in my own kitchen is a second. A lot of the times people can't notice them, and they're pretty personal, like some things that one person might be bothered by, someone else doesn't even notice. So that's another fun thing of just coming in person is, you know, each one is unique. Here's another example where this is a super drippy glaze. It's layered glazes, so they run down, and you can see right here, the glaze peeled away a little bit from the clay. Now, someone else, that might not take away from the piece for them. That's kind of like a natural variation. It's not technically a defect, so to speak. It's not a crack. But I find it very unsightly. But there are times with my assistant where something will bug me and not bug her. I'll be like, oh gosh, this is definitely a second. And she's like, really? I don't think so. But that's also just because it's a personal taste sometimes. But this is a piece that is in the studio shop now. It's a planter that doesn't have any defect. I just didn't like that appearance of that little glaze pull there. So I've been experimenting more recently with like hand painted designs, like this serpent mug or these little strawberries. So that's kind of just a direction I've been pulled in more recently. And I'm also experimenting with stamps. So I've been using these sponge stamps, which is actually a very old technique. You know, one of the oldest production techniques is cutting out a stamp from a sponge and repeating a pattern. I can show you over here. But this is a new method that new to me method that I'm trying out. And I really love referencing the kind of history of production pottery. So this is like a lot of pottery from the 1800s, especially in the UK. They use these cut sponges to repeat a pattern. And so I had my own custom stamps made, and I'm playing around with that now. 6 days out of the week, this is just a packing table. We have all our boxes underneath. This was also a custom built piece. So it has all these sections for our different box sizes. We have so many different box sizes because people place orders on the web shop of different combinations of pieces, and so we can never predict how people are going to order, and packing and shipping ceramics is its whole other art that I've learned. And I feel like I own a shipping company in addition to a pottery company because it's such a big part of the business is making sure that people receive the piece in good condition that they've ordered. I will brag for one moment that our breakage rate is far less than 1%. It's like less than half of 1% because we really know how to do it now. And through trial and error, we have all the materials. And so this is mostly the shipping area. On Saturdays, we'll lay out a whole bunch of pieces on this table. These are more seconds, samples, one-off tests. a whole variety of things. These are tiles from my line with Ceramic Asura, which is a really amazing production facility in Guadalajara, Mexico that has a very rich history of working with artists. And they do all kinds of editions with artists. With me, they made these tiles. So I made the original tiles here in the studio, and then I took a few trips to Guadalajara to work on the samples. And it was really a cool collaboration, and we still have the tiles available. And these ones are hand painted, and these ones obviously have the texture, and these ones are pattern texture. So these are pressed with a hydraulic press that presses the pattern into the clay to give it that ridged profile. Today I'm going to show you how I make this mug start to finish. There's a lot of steps. We're going to set up some molds for casting. This is the first step of making the mug. And we start with plaster molds. The plaster molds were made from a piece I made on the wheel. So I made the original shape on the wheel, and then we make a plaster mold from that original shape so that we can repeat it. But the real reason that I do slip casting is not for the repeating, but because of marbling. So all these squeezy bottles here are tinted colored slips that we make here in the studio. And this is how I get the pattern on the mug. So it's made from liquid clay. It's not painted on. It's just a marbled colored clay. And the molds allow me to make all these colors and swirl them around. I wouldn't be able to get that pattern on the wheel. So that's really why I started slip casting, was because I had these ideas about marbling and I wanted to pursue them. So casting made sense for that. So I mix up the slip. So slip is just liquid clay. So this is truly just clay that's in a liquid format so that you can pour it. And what plaster does is it sucks the water out of the clay. So when you pour it in the mold, the plaster starts sucking the water out and creating a shell. So we'll pour the slip in, let it sit, in this case for about an hour, but that depends on what you're making. And then we'll pour it out, and what will be left will be that shell, which is the mug. For my technique, I use these other colors, so I'll do that first. First I'll add my marble colors, and then we'll fill it up. This is stoneware, but you can cast with any kind of slip. We just primarily work with stoneware in the studio. The first color to go in is white. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the slip that's in a bottle, and how many colors I use depends on what I'm making. This is the beach mug, which has been my best-selling mug for several years. And so it's white slip, blue slip, and then the body of the mug is made from like a speckled tan stoneware. So I'll just give it a minute to set up, and then I can use the sponge to take away any extra. And then I take my slip and I pour it in through a strainer to catch any chunks that I might have missed. And this table I had custom made, so it has a slit in the middle so that when I'm ready to dump the mold out in about an hour, I'll just pour it right back into the bin underneath. And now I'll put a timer on for an hour. So our hour-long timer just went off. I'm gonna take the lid off of the slip, and now I can just empty these out back into the slip bucket. And I'm gonna let them sit for a few minutes, and then I'll show you how I trim the reservoir, which is this extra bit of clay that we pour so that it can have a nice flat, even rim. And so this will sit for 5-10 minutes, and then I can show you how I trim it. So these have sat here for about 10 minutes, and now they're dry enough that I can use my tiny blade to trim the reservoir. This up here is called the reservoir. This is what it looks like with no clay on it. And this is basically extra clay. It's not part of the mug, but it helps us have a really clean line when we're trimming the lip to have a nice even rim. So I have this tiny blade. And then I can just go in again and just like really clean it up good. So these are mugs that I already casted that have now been given a chance to dry a little bit, and now they're ready to have the handles added. So they have to set up in the molds at least overnight so that they're not too soft and I can just pull them out without making them misshapen. And I have some handles. These are also casted in a separate mold. And I need to clean them up to get rid of the seam line and the extra clay. So I just use a blade to kind of clean up the seam line. Whenever a mold has two parts, it has a seam line. These molds have one part, so there's no seam line, but the handles do have the two-part mold. Okay, so once I have it ready, I score it, which just is scratching up the surface to give it something to grab onto. And when I cast these, I've left a space with no pattern where I'm going to attach the handle. So I always have to be aware of that when I'm marbling. And then I score this side as well. And then I take a little more slip, just a little bit, like that. And then I attach it on. Make sure it's nice and straight. And then I just use my finger to smooth out that attachment point. I always work in batches because it's more efficient to, cast a whole bunch of mugs instead of just two. I did these for an example, but I'll usually have like 12 handles, 12 mugs at a time. And that might take close to an hour to do, 45 minutes to an hour. And then the last step is just smoothing out where I attached it with a sponge to make it more invisible, that seam. And once this is done, the mug has to dry slowly. If it dries too fast, the handle can pop off or get a small crack in it. So once they're done, I wrap them up, let them dry slowly. And when they're totally dry, that's when I'll smooth out the rim of the mug. When the mug is totally dry, that's when I clean up the rim. And you can see it has this sharp edge, which obviously you would not want to put against your mouth. So I take this kind of scrubby cloth, which is on top of a wet sponge, and I just press it and spin it to kind of sand the lip. And you can see how it already smoothed it out a decent amount. But then I do go in with a sponge by hand, and I just really smooth it nicely, because this detail feels pretty important. So these are the mugs that we cleaned, and now they can go in the kiln to be bisqued. And when the kiln is finished firing, we'll glaze them. So the bisque firing takes about 6 hours and then another at least 12 hours or more to cool back down again. It reaches temperature and then it turns off, and that takes quite a while. For the purpose of today's video, I already bisqued some mugs so that I can show you how I glaze them and you don't have to wait for that whole process. I'm mixing the glaze. It naturally settles, so there's water on the top and the sediment on the bottom. So it's very important to mix it. I actually love using a toilet brush. I find it's the best mixer. So these are just toilet brushes from the 99-cent store, and they really scrape up everything that's settled on the bottom. So for this design, I'm only glazing the inside of the mug. So I pour it in, and then I rotate it to pour it out. And that just coats the inside. And then any little unevenness I can clean up with a sponge. And also for this design, I choose to glaze the handle. That's just a personal preference. And so I can just dip the handle in. And then the final step is stamping the mug. So I'll show you that. This is a regular rubber stamp with an underglaze stamp pad. Underglaze is like a pigment that is, I use in a lot of different steps, and then I have my stamp on the bottom. What I love most about working with clay is, I heard a quote from an older potter a long time ago that really stuck with me. He said, I could live 60 lifetimes and I would still have more to do with clay, because there is truly an endless way to work with clay. And slip casting, wheel throwing, hand building, there's so much. 3D printing, there's a million ways. You can never get to the end of the medium, and that is just like that expansive feeling feels very freeing to me, because if I ever get a little, kind of writer's block in the studio, I always know there's more things for me to learn. It just feels like there's always more to discover, and that is a really good feeling.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.